This is Women Ending War, the podcast where you'll discover that there is another path, that peace is possible, and that the women here can lead the way. I'm Dr. Elana Stockman. I'm here with Eva Dalek, my co-host. Welcome. Salam alaikum, Eva.
Shalom aleichem.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. How was your birthday?
Amazing. I celebrated with my family and friends, and it was just a great way to enter 50s.
Wow.
In my birthplace.
Well, welcome to the 50s.
Welcome to the 50s.
That's
in
fantastic.
Jaffa.
Yeah. You have a lot to show for it, Eva. You've been a lot of places and done a lot of things.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, and speak a zillion languages and been to a lot of countries and have seen a lot of things, especially around peacemaking, conflict resolution.
Peace activation.
Peace activation. If you could give one insight about what it takes to bring peace, to create a new reality, what would be your greatest insight from all your travels?
I would say amahoro, which is a term in Kirundi, which is one of the first terms I heard when I did my first field mission in Burundi after the genocide in Rwanda. And amahoro means the one that brings the peace. And this is really the foundation for peace activation. I believe that the key insight for me is the inner work, the responsibility and the ownership that we take each on our own triggers and what we bring into the conflict that exacerbate the conflict. And if we as peace builders and peace activists and activator can take more on responsibility and accountability for the harm that we create, I think we will be living in a different world. And I've seen that throughout the 22 conflict zone I've worked in the past 30 years.
22 conflict zones you've been in.
Yeah.
And still, we talked the other day about how people will still say, oh no, but we're different.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Every conflict feels it's different, it's special, it has a specific circumstances, and it does. At the same time, there's certain trends throughout the conflict zones and throughout actually personal development as well. As human beings, we're all struggling with the same issues of abandonment, rejection, betrayal, humiliation, injustice. And on our journey on earth, this is what we try to heal. And every time is a new cycle and a new layer. And by being honest and vulnerable and authentic on where we are at, and as I mentioned last time, having compassionate self-forgiveness, I think we can really activate peace in the Middle East. I know it's kind of, people think that it's one of the hardest, more complicated, intractable conflict zone. It's not. Sorry to break this illusion.
No, that's what we're here for. And that's really exciting because that's a great introduction to our special guest today. We have a guest today who is an expert on this, on a vision for the future here, for a peaceful future. Our guest today is Professor Ronit Levine Schnur, Senior Lecturer at Tel Aviv University Faculty of Law, and the co-founder of the forum, which is called the Day After the War Forum, which is a fantastic name, which has now been renamed. You're calling it something else, called the Israeli Interest Regional Security Alliance Initiative.
Right. Hi.
Hi.
Very pleased to be here with you.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Levine Schnur. So tell us a little bit about the forum.
So immediately after October 7th, my first thoughts were that going to war under such circumstances where we are all so amazed by the terrible massacre and the surprise that we suffered, in terms of strategic planning, is problematic. Because being responsive would most likely lead us to act on emotional basis. And in terms of strategy, war planning, we need to be beyond the tactics. We need to have a grand strategy. And the thought was, which I started to develop with my partner, Professor Daphna Yoel, is that Israel has to gain some understanding about what its grand strategy, what is it that we want, that we need, how to bring security back. And so just like the first week after October 7th, we formed this group of experts called the Day After the War Forum. And we invited in people from a range of disciplines, from Middle Eastern studies, psychology, law, international law, conflict resolution, political science, a variety of fields. And we said, we need to do two things. These were our immediate thoughts. First, to have a perspective. What's happening now? What's the effect? What's the meaning of October 7th on our political arena? The second thing was to understand where is the Israeli public now? Where is the public opinion leaning? Because we know, our intuition was that following such events, the leaning will be towards more radicalism. And so we wanted to understand what's happening to peoples after trauma. What can we expect? How can we talk with people? And so we formed these two sub-study groups, one led by me, one by my colleague, Professor Yael. And we started exploring first the geopolitical story. So there are two main things here. First, there's the local politics, meaning the regional politics. Second, there's the question, which Eva just referred to in her introductory notes, that it is a conflict, and conflicts are sometimes resolved. There is resolution, even for some of the hardest conflict in the world. So we need to have inspiration from these conflicts. We need to be inspired by the thought that there is hope. And this is something that after October 7th, but even now, 9 months later, thinking of hope is beyond most of people's imagination.
Right. We hear that a lot. We hear that after October 7th, most Israelis took 2 steps to the right. I hear that all the time. There was a debate between, I don't know if you saw this, Idan Reichel said, what can you do? There's no choice other than to be, right-wing now. And actually, Achinoam Nini, talked back to that. And she said, no, some of us have actually gone in the opposite direction. And we're starting to see how important it is to work for a different future and to see a different future. And also to see the other, because taking 2 steps to the right has a lot to do with dehumanizing the other and all of that. And Achinoam Nini was saying, no, it's about humanizing. And it's something that I deeply identified with also, because I see a lot of people in my own surroundings taking 2 steps to the right. And I keep arguing back and saying, no, we need a different vision. We need a whole different idea.
In Israel, we usually have this popular dance called a Yemen step, that you take 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I don't care if you take 2 steps here or there. The question is whether you can imagine a day after, whether you can imagine the future. Just have a picture in your head. Where would you want to be? So after we called it the Day After the War Forum, over time, we changed it because the words day after became overused. So we wanted to be more specific about our goals.
Even though it's bull, it's exactly what we should be talking about. In other words, it's exactly the conversation we need to be having. It's about imagining a day after. But I totally get this. I didn't mean to sound like I'm criticizing the decision. I'm just pointing out that it's a great name.
Okay. We still have it. We still own it. So we have them both. But the idea is that we wanted to say, look, we are Israelis. This is what we are. Let's be one with our identity in the sense that let's hold initiative about what we want. Because once you push people to start exploring how they view the future, you suddenly see that they are not as radical as you would have thought. Because once you break it down to operational questions, people start saying, well, of course, let's speak about the Palestinians. If you ask them, what do you see for the Palestinians, like a big question, then they would only say really bad things. But if you say, look, isn't it our interest that the Palestinians will lean towards the moderate side of the map, of the regional map, and not towards the jihadistic side of the regional map, then most people would say, yeah, of course, you're right. And then we can ask, okay, so how we do that? How we get people to shift their focus from a more radical jihadistic leaning, terrorist approving, to a more moderate perspective. How do we do that? What do we need to bring in? And then based on our research...
That's a really interesting... I just going to stand on that point for a second, because that's a whole different conception of who we are, what we're dealing with here. Because basically what you're saying is that it's not, us against them. It's not Israelis versus Palestinians. What it is normal people against violent radicals everywhere. Mm-hmm. And that violent radicals who want to uproot normalcy exist everywhere. And that if we can find that common ground, that common humanity, that common vision for non-radical, non-violence, then we will discover that we're all the same, that we all have the same core humanity.
Yeah, and I think that what happened in October 7 is just bringing the conflict to the living room of the Israeli, that in Israel they've been living for so long in denial of what happened in 1948, that October 7 was like shaking up the foundation of the creation of the states. And I think that's the day after. It's not just the day after October 7. I think it's the day after 1948, the creation of the Israeli state, because the foundational myth on which a lot of the Israeli, including myself as a Palestinian citizen of Israel, we grew up on a certain narrative that was applauded, and that is highlighting the role of IDF, the Israeli Defense Army, on how to protect for security, and that we have no option other than protect our border, protect our people, without any perspective or introspection on who are these people? These are not people that came out of nowhere. These are the indigenous people of this land that we've eradicated. And so it's really important to put that in context of when we speak about the day after, and what future do we want to see together. And it is together, because when you speak to normal people, everybody's Israelis are not going anywhere, and Palestinians as well aren't going anywhere. So we are going to live together, and the question is, how are we going to live together? Do we really want to spend another 75 years in claiming, reclaiming, and pushing and colonizing? And there's a lot of sense-making here, that when you pose your question the way you frame it, you bring it back to the earth. And that's what I appreciate.
So it is very interesting to identify these current moments as if we are on 47, 48, 49. Mm-hmm. So it is a very important perspective for us, and for Palestinians, I believe, as well. Because for many years, we have been able to convince ourselves that we can deny the reality, that the reality exists but does not exist. And this was splashed toward our face in the harshest way on October 7th. And what we identify is that people realize that it is a new era. And therefore, we have an opportunity to speak with Israelis on terms that were not acceptable before October 7th. And here is what we say. We say, look, don't look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as if it is the perspective of the conflict. It is the conflict amongst the jihadistic countries led by our joint enemy, Iran, and the moderate countries. And the question, as I said, is where will the Palestinian be, in which part? And we know that they can and want and desire to be a part of the moderate side. So it's a regional perspective. Read the map. We have Egypt with a peace agreement for 45 years. We have Jordan with peace agreement for over 30 years. We have Bahrain and UAE, United Emirates, with peace agreements from 2020. We have Saudi Arabia towards normalization on the eve of October 7th, bringing Oman with them. We have Sudan signing the Declaration Principles of Abrahamic Alliance. So it's an entire region, entire X or alliance that its goal is to stand against the effect and the ambitions of Iran. And where Iran succeeds is where the state is in a failure state. Mm-hmm. So failed states are very, very attractive for Iran. Mm-hmm. And then we need to ask ourselves, what do we need to do to push Iran away from our area? We need to strengthen the Palestinian statehood for them to be able to resist the impact of Iran. We need to be able to collect our resources together, to have our shared interest collide so that we can stand together against this jihadistic axis. Now, once you have this perspective in mind, we don't have to go back to where it's most hurtful, 48. I don't believe we are at a time when we can agree on what happened on 48. We are still in a conflict of narratives.
But I think that we need to be in a conflict of narrative. That's the whole point. And if we remember, like putting the jihadistic and Daesh and ISIS and all this movement of called terrorism in the context of geopolitical perspective, is to understand that we're talking about two axes that are developed between US, Europe, and Russia and China. And we need to understand that we need to question the root causes of this movement and stop calling them extremist and terrorist because they don't fit our own definition of movement for reclaiming certain freedom, reclaiming certain structure within failed state, especially within failed state. Because I worked for 22 years in the African continent, and right now I just did an evaluation of what is the perspective and opinion of African countries towards the EU and the US versus China and Russia and the Arab states. And we really see clear inclination towards Russia and China and Arab states. Why? Because they feel that their grievances are not being heard, and that the US and the EU and Israel, amongst all the Western countries, are imposing principles of democracy that they're not holding. They're not walking their talk. And so these are exactly le terrain, the matter that create and promote and sustain this extremist group. And that's really important to take into consideration. They don't come out of the blue.
It's so right. And so one of the things that I've been thinking of is that there is a very common Israeli picture that we can depict of a villa in the jungle. So this is like, we are here, the Jewish land, all around us are enemies, barbarians, jungle. I don't know what's a reference. And
Costa Rica.
Yeah, we can only protect ourselves, and everyone is against us. And I'm every lecture I give, every meeting I'm at, I'm saying we need to have this villa for sale. We need to put this picture away from our heads. Why is that? Because we are not in a jungle. Yeah. We are exactly where we are supposed to be. We, the Jewish people, the Palestinian people, we are part of this land. We are part of this region. This is our backbones. This is where we surfaced from. Abraham is from this region. We are all his sons and daughters. So if we understand that we are not foreigners to this area, and I'm saying us as Israelis, we are not unlike others, and they are not different from us. Mm-hmm. We are part of this region, and we can find ourselves in our heart as one with the Arabic peoples of the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And actually, many Israelis are immigrants from these countries. I mentioned the Yemen steppe earlier, and I know it because this is part of our new tradition in the past 100 years after Yemens began to arrive to Israel, before even it was established. And so with Morocco and Tunisia and Lube, and so these countries, and Iran and Iraq, we are from here. We are traditionals. It's true, Israel is a very unique country in the sense that it says on itself that it's both democratic and Jewish. And I translate this Jewish to traditional. And I say, yes, we have some democratic tradition here, which is unlike the region, as you said. And we cannot expect to impose our democratic, and we should not desire to impose our democratic beliefs on others who do not share them. But we are also part of the tradition of association to the land, to the people, to the families, to the history, to the tribeness that is part of the region in the Middle East. So here what I'm saying is that we have a lot of in common. We have a lot in common. We have shared interest. And we can find this interest together. We can find them. We can work towards them together. So,
can I ask a question?
Yes,
So Eva, you brought up this issue of understanding the root cause grievance, right? About the importance of all sides understanding what the other side has been through, and that's why you brought up 48, because you're saying that, if I understand right, that if we don't go to the root cause and don't understand those grievances, then it's hard to continue the conversation. But it's hard to do that when those grievances are being represented by violent groups, right? So that's a little bit of like a conundrum, is it? It's how do we do that? How do we, at the one hand, say violence is not legitimate, terrorism is not legitimate, we don't want to engage with terrorism, we want to stop the violence, we want to promote moderation, but at the same time, we also have to hear
and address
we have to hear
the grievance.
That's hard. That's complicated.
Yeah, and it's not a competition of suffering, and I think that's where we are right now. Who's suffering more? Who's more victim? Is it because I think what October 7 or the event that happened since then brought to the light is that Israel is a state in trauma.
Yeah.
And even though we're in 2024, we're referring to 1940s, the Holocaust, as if it was yesterday, while having a genocide happening now that we're not able to see. And I think that's really interesting to observe from the outside. It's like, where are we in the present today? Are we in the present, or are we in 1948 or before, etc.? And I think that's where we want to bring everybody, because I fully agree with you about the fact that we have common ground. And that's part of the peace activation project. Let's Activate Peace is actually to record truth from both Palestinian and Israeli on their identity and their vision to the future, without them being together, just like separately, and then analyzing, seeing how common they have. Their vision for the future is common, and both of them want to live actually together. They're willing to drop the narrative, but before dropping the narrative, you need to be able to hear it. Right. And I think that's where the power of holding space for each other's narrative, how important was it in our conversation even, for me to be able to hear you on where you were at, and exactly for me, and right now for you, Professor. So I think it's like this safe space of expression and holding the narrative of the other in one heart, even though it's hard and challenging, is really key. I don't need to deny your truth. This is your truth. That's what you grew up with. And so for me, that's where compassionate self-forgiveness come. And I would love for you also to hold my truth, even if you disagree with it. And the point is like, let's agree to disagree and agree on one vision of we all want to live in peace here. We all want to live in freedom, in justice.
So let me say, first, I disagree that there is a genocide here, not denying the harm and loss, but genocide is intentional ethnic cleansing, and I don't believe this is what's happening. And also,
it's been happening since 1948. So
sorry,
it's been happening since 1948. It's been like ethnic cleansing of Palestinians.
So. Yeah, I think for the purpose of where we want to be, and this is exactly my point, we might disagree on how we understand the reality. Yes. We might disagree. And therefore, the question is whether we first have to agree or not. And what I think is that we do have to agree on some points, but we should understand we won't be able to agree on everything, but we do need to reclaim our national story from the hands of the terrorists and radicals. So right now, and I'm saying on both sides, those who have a patriotic narrative are those possessing a weapon and radical beliefs. And I'm, as a person who's not radical, I'm a moderate. And I want to be able to speak out my narrative, my language, my beliefs, my desire to call Israel my homeland and my legitimate homeland. And I want to do that and to reclaim my ability to do so. To reclaim it from those who argue that you can claim it only if you hold the most radical position. So, again, because we started to speak here about peacemaking and peace building, and I'm saying we are in a place where for Israelis, maybe not only for Israelis, but speaking on the Israeli interest, we have to speak about security. We are so afraid. We are so afraid. We have no resilience. We cannot stand to our enemies. Everyone on, like on shorts can just do everything they want. It is so scary. So the levels of distrust and fear and exaggeration of what we see them to be, how we understand Palestinians to be, what we say they are, is a mountain at the moment. So our purpose is to think, okay, hold on. Let's talk about the future. So this is where I want to be, talking about the future. And can we understand that there are a lot of powers, forces, interests that do not want the war to continue? And we can enlist them towards our ends. We can find a resolution that allows us to look into the future and believe that we can sustain.
So if you were in a position of decision-making, like if you had a seat around the table now in the government and the people making these decisions, what would you be doing?
I would resign because I think that where I need to be is not at the decision-making table. I think where I need to be, and everyone needs to be, is on the streets. We need to work from below. It's a question of public opinion. We need to affect people's hearts and minds and beliefs. That is where we need to be.
What would you like to change in Israeli belief systems?
Exactly. This is what I'm asking.
What do you want to change?
My goal in my life at the moment is to allow people a language that they can speak about the future and to have them holding the following ideas. First, everyone wants to live a secured life. Mm-hmm. Second, Arabs are not our enemies. Palestinians are not our enemies. We have enemies. There are those who risk our security, but they are not the Palestinians and they are not the Arabs. Third, there is a lot in common between us and the Arab world. The Arab world has provided us with a peace initiative 20 years ago, 22 years ago, approved by the League of Arab Nations, the Saudi initiative, where they propose to normalize the relationship with Israel all over the League of Arab, the 22 countries part of the Arab League. And we need to understand that it is our joint interest with the Arab world that we are part of to have a strong coalition of interests against those who desire to destroy the moderates, to destroy the peacefulness, to destroy prosperity. We are all against those, and those are the current governance in Iran, not the Iranians.
And what about Gaza? Like, let's say you're impacting people's perspectives. What would you want to see happen right now with Gaza?
What we have to have now is this understanding that the resolution for Gaza has two main principles. First, to to change, to end the war, and to bring peace to the region means to align interests with the Arab countries. We cannot do it alone, and we cannot say it's the Americans, the Israelis, and the Palestinians. This doesn't work. We tried it, it doesn't work. We have to go on the way that was proposed by the Arabs, to have a joint plan with the Arab world together, to bring them in, to sit with them at the table, say, what can the Saudis contribute? What can the Emirates contribute? What can the Egyptian contribute? Everyone needs to contribute something.
And the Palestinian as well.
Of course.
You know, I'm
just to say,
to finish,
that was the first thing. You know what?
No, just like it's interesting because yesterday I was speaking with my aunt whose family is in Gaza. I have my family in Gaza right now. Some of them died, and some of them are moving from one place to another, seeking refuge and losing houses, losing businesses. Like, situation is really dear. So I do want to bring it back to the ground, to the practical terms. I think the first step is to stop the war, or genocide, or crisis, or whatever name we want to call it. We need to stop it. And I would want you to be at the table so that you can stop it. Because if you're at the streets, then those that are left on the table are this 1.5% decision maker, mostly male, that are conducting this testosterone-driven violence, whether it's extremist or political government. And we who are the moderate, which is, I think, I fully agree with you. I think you are referring to the 95% majority, silent majority that doesn't have a space on the table. And we need to bring them to the table. We need to work bottom up and up down.
So, and also, I just want to say something else. You were also very involved. You were one of the leaders of the anti-judicial reform movement, right? So, I was there also, 11 months of protesting. And, I fully agree with you that I, want Israelis to have a different perspective, especially about humanity. I'm, about who is us, who is them. I mean, even when we talk about we, who is we? So often Israeli conversations, when we say we, what we really mean are Jewish Israelis, as opposed to we being, everybody who lives here, or everybody who is Israeli, or everybody who belongs here. So even that, so I really identify with what you're saying about the need for that groundswell, that change of attitude and stuff. Also, my field is sociology, anthropology, so I'm always looking at social trends. That's like my main area of interest. And, at the same time, I look at these 11 months of protest, and it was so frustrating. There was something, I'm sorry, am I upsetting you?
Sorry.
It's so frustrating, right, that we had 11 months, and the government didn't give a shit. I'm sorry. Am I allowed to say that on podcast?
Yeah, absolutely.
The government, Bibi is a master of not caring. And, he's a master of all the political, and you see it now also with the there are months and months and months of people on the streets every day. There isn't a day that I don't get a request to show up to a protest, for a ceasefire, all of that stuff. Not a day when I'm like, it's an emergency. Today's the day. You have to show up now. Every day there are protests all around the country. And it feels like,
nobody cares.
I wanted to, me personally, I'm just saying that this is one of my greatest, frustrations. It's really debilitating. It has this really, it has a very deep emotional impact on me, that sort of sense of, powerlessness, So that's what, I understand why you would want to quit. That was a really funny answer, but I'm not funny, but also interesting. But this sense of powerlessness for me has been overwhelming.
Okay, so I just want to cover a few points.
Yeah, I know.
First, I had two principles for Gaza. You had a question about Gaza. Said, first thing, the first principle, it's a regional issue. It has to be dealt with a regional coalition. Okay, like the Daesh, the collapsing of Daesh was a matter of a regional coalition. We cannot do it alone. It's not a matter of Israel versus Palestinians, or Israelis and the Americans against the Palestinians. It doesn't work like that. It's a matter of a regional perspective. We have to have all these parties, all these states of interest at one table, and then we can divide the labor amongst these parties. And ending the war, bringing back the hostages, it is our duty. And it has to be a part of a plan that includes normalization of Israel's relationships with other Arab countries, rehabilitation of Gaza, radicalization of like putting out the terrorist impact on the educational level. We have to do that together in a joint effort, and we have to do it yesterday, if not 9 months ago. So this is what I support on that level. Now, for it to happen, and for it to happen properly, for us to have the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank being a part of the moderate X, for that to happen, we have to assure the Palestinians that the future holds independence, prosperity, and peacefulness for them. We have to say it clearly. It is our goal, I'm speaking as Israelis, it is our goal that you will succeed. We need to have our hand out there to help you, to assist you, to be with you, maybe a shoulder to cry on, maybe not, but we have to do it in a way that we understand that the future of an independent Palestinian state is part of the vision. If we will not say it clearly that it is a part of the vision, we will empower the radicals and the Hamas because they offer a vision, and we have to have an alternative vision. Mm-hmm. Now, this is to cover my answer from before. Now, for what you said, Ilana, I don't disagree that we have to have this both, like the sandwich approach, top down and bottom up. Okay, I think that what I identify for myself is that in politics you tend to polarize, you tend to be personalized. Mm-hmm. Okay, you tend to be a very it's a very surface, the surface level. You don't go into deep down to beliefs, emotions, wants, desires. You can't get there. So for me, what I understand as my role now is to speak to the Israeli public. This is where I can get something that I know is not there. So I totally would want women and the right people at the right places and the right tables, and I support those who do that. And I am willing to cooperate with any politician who is willing to hear, and we do that all the time. But, and here I disagree with you, the democratic movement of the past year was a huge success.
Yeah.
A huge success. There was nothing like it before for Israelis to understand that they can protest, they can act together, they can find coalition, they can have people on the streets fighting for the most elementary things for them. Of course, life is more elementary than rights, but still. Why is that? Because then we have a sense of community that acts together. And this is something that we didn't have for years on years. Now, if
that's true.
The government...
Actually, that's true. I think what you're saying is true. I think that the protest movements definitely gave definition to a movement. And I think that we're seeing some impacts of that as well. There was the big peace event last week or 2 weeks ago.
1st of July.
It was, was it 4th of July? Where people were saying, this is the first time that the left is rebuilding its camp since the assassination of Rabin. I didn't relate to that assessment at all because during the assassination of Rabin, I wasn't in a left camp. I was a young religious Zionist married with my head covered and my skirt and all of that. So I wasn't there at all. So it doesn't relate to me to say like, I'm reviving what I was in 1995. So I didn't understand that personally, but I did totally understand that there are a lot of people in Israel who felt that loss, who have been feeling that loss of community, what you were describing, the loss of definition.
Wait, I wanna push back a bit here because I'm thinking that actually the Israeli left, which is really minor, is actually more organized and activist than other groups. When I was speaking about a sense of community during the protest, I was actually speaking to a much larger group of Israelis who are at the center. Okay? So here is what I want to say. For this very large group of people who are not right-wing or extreme right-wing or left-wing, they are not toward peace and nor for annexation. Okay? They are not at this side. For many years, the politicians leading this camp were really specializing in not saying anything. That was their specialty. You were elected on the basis of your ability not to say a single meaningful thing. And this is what has now changed in the sense of our democratic liberalism or liberal democracy, that people say, what we want you to do is to protect our institutions, is to protect our rights, and you will be examined or your ability to do that. Now I'm telling you from inner rooms that these politicians on January 23, they did not know a thing about the judicial system, the governmental system. They did not understand the importance or how justices are being elected. They didn't care about it.
You're absolutely right. I really want to highlight that, because what you're speaking about, Professor, is that you're giving back the civic right to the citizen, reminding them that the citizenship is a contract between the individual and the government. And the government are supposed to represent the interest of the citizen. And they're not now.
And now, after October 7th, and it's historical moments. I mean, I can't believe these two things happened together. That after October 7th, we now have to have an opinion regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, regarding the geopolitics. Because during the 9 months or 11 months of the protest against the judicial reform, there was no mentioning of the conflict.
Exactly.
There was no mentioning of the occupation. There was no mentioning of what's happening within our borders. It's not elsewhere. It's not in Rwanda. It's just here. There was no mentioning for it. And now we have to have a language. We have to have an ideology. We have to do things together to say, look, this is what we want. These are our beliefs. And this is why I think that this is my, on the personal level, this is my role to speak out this type of significance. What is that we want? And then politicians can argue. But first of all, the Israeli public has to have a solid opinion that a regional security alliance is our interest. It is for our best interest if we are able to align forces with the moderate countries and peoples around us, because we are part of it. And this is the only way we can bring to an end the ambition to destroy the state of Israel, to ignore the fact that there are peoples here, there are Palestinians here. We can't ignore these facts. And to live together, we have to live together.
If I may, I love your passion. I really love your passion. I feel the same passion towards finding a resolution for this very solvable conflict for me. And I think what you're speaking about is really the tip of the iceberg. Up until now, we've been just like tiptoeing on the iceberg and focusing on like, we need security and this is our position. And where you're taking the public or the work that you're doing on the ground is actually, let's drop the position and go into the interest. And to find the interest, we need to ask why we want what we want, and how can we find a way to work together to get to it.
Exactly.
And this is really, really important right now, because most people don't even understand that what they're repeating from their institution doesn't even represent them.
Exactly.
And that brings the accountability back to the institution that are here to represent the citizen.
Exactly.
The social contract.
Exactly. And for us to understand what we want, we first need to ask, what do we want?
Exactly. And why we want it.
Right. And then we say, okay, look, this is what we want. 1, 2, 3. This is what we want. Now we can think, how can we secure it? Now you can't enforce on Israelis to support a Palestinian state because they care about the Palestinian interests. They don't. Okay, they don't. And I can't change their minds.
Well, maybe we can. I mean, maybe if you're talking
no,
What
I think we can, but I think we can do
from
that from the Israeli side.
interest.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
I agree.
You come and say, it is our interest for them to be a part of the moderate side, and therefore, this and that is what we need and what we want and what we aim for.
If we
Exactly.
want the real security comes from peace. If we really want security, we need peace.
We need freedom and peace.
Freedom, justice,
freedom,
peace.
yeah.
Yes.
But I think
Okay.
what you're highlighting, we're coming to a close, but what you're highlighting is actually in 2016, after the Tukeitan, my friend and I, partner, Dalit Eliyahu, we formed One Whole Peace. And it's a soul-centered movement, and we said we need to tackle the psychology of the Israeli public. Because indeed, what you said, they don't care about the Palestinian because for them the Palestinian is an enemy. However, if you're able to go deeper into the root causes of what do you want and why you want it and why is it important, and tackle these psychological root causes of the conflict, you can actually create a vision for a very beautiful, peaceful, honey and milk land for both people.
We have
Amen.
to have this faith.
Absolutely,
Amen.
I'm
We
with
have
you.
to hold faith.
And hold the
And
vision, yes.
as religious or people or believers or people with such a long history of identity, we have to have this vision that things are beyond us. We cannot control everything. We need to think positively and act towards the future we want to be a part of. So thank you very much for
Thank
the opportunity
you on those
to
words.
share my thoughts.
I'm so happy to end on a note of optimism and hope. That's really, that was unexpected, I would say. No, it wasn't unexpected, I should say. It was totally expected. It was great to have you.
Thank you
Professor
so much,
Ronit
Professor.
Levine Schnur. Good luck with everything that you're doing. It's really so important. And thank you for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you so much. Good luck with the podcast.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you for your passion. I share it.